whole variety of shadow tones. So there's really nothing wrong with it. See, the same combination gives me this. Just more yellow. If I go this and this, I can get very illuminating tones like that. So there's nothing wrong with that, and it's actually very powerful. And I think Dumont taught it more as a conceptual idea, of course. But if you look at Zorn, like when the Zorn show was here at the National Academy, and if you looked at his, if you looked at some of his portraits, it was very deep shadow tones. Dark. Even a young, there was one of a teenage girl in an interior lighting. Very dark, you know. Beautifully done though, because everything was pitched accordingly. So a lot of this kind of drawing, which is kind of loosely stated right now, should start to evoke him. And a lot of it is simply placement. See, so it's not, there's nothing too specific yet, but there's overall placement so that you're dealing with eye sockets, where the nose is in relation to the center, mouth, you know. Don't have to describe it too much, but at least if you place the corners there. Keep my shadows a little bit more illuminated in the beginning. But at the approximate proper value. And when I say the approximate proper value is that there has to be a certain range that shadow is in for it to reach shadow. So it's something that I didn't talk about yet, and I was going to get into it a little bit after I do this, and I will. But remind me to get into some of that. See, so placement at this stage is kind of important. You don't have to. You could be very loose, and it depends. But if you have really good drawing chops, you can kind of make a mess and then get yourself out of it. And sometimes it's fun to work that way. But it's more efficient to try to place as well as possible. So at this stage, it should kind of start to express him. You know, doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be right on in any way. You know, and you actually almost you don't want it that way because it's probably better to be a little freer with it because because you don't want to lock yourself in. It's one of the reasons why I do like to start with paint as opposed to drawing, because the drawing starts to lock you in. And when I'm talking about drawing, I like to just place notes and start to like look for things like where does the center of the eyes relate to the top of the head and the bottom. Then you work off of there. So I always think that it's helpful to start with the halfway point. So generally, if you're going from the top of the skull to the chin, the center of the eyes are the halfway point. So if you take that as your halfway point and see if that works, and it kind of does. It almost always does. You know, people like to think it doesn't, but it actually does. You know, unless the head is thrown back, then everything changes. But then you work accordingly. So each third gets progressively larger as you throw back. So this is larger, smaller. It's reduction. But if you're facing dead on, you can basically think that this is halfway. So if you decide that this is the top, this is the bottom, halfway between the two is where you would place the eyes. It doesn't look at it first. It says, ah, that can't be. But when you start taking into account where the widow's peak would be, where the brow ridge would be, it does make sense. See? So if you hold to that principle, it's a good point of departure, and you probably won't go too far off. If you don't hold to that, you will go far off. I can tell you that.
Top of the skull, are you taking the hair into consideration?
Back here. No, not the hair. Because,
Not the hair. Okay,
no,
so back
no.
here.
Right.
Right.
So it's this point, not here. See,
Okay.
that's the mistake that most people make, because if you're looking at the model in profile, right? Typical skull goes up to about this point, which is around the widow's peak. Then it starts to break up, tapers, maxes out around here, starts to taper down this way, comes down this way, comes that way, right? Eyes, center, somewhere, right? So, and then nose, base of the cranium, lines up with the nose, ear here. It's all in books. Rayberg would say that this. You know, this is all in books.
I know.
But it's true. It's all in, a lot of this stuff is you know, there are a gazillion books out there that breaks this kind of stuff down fairly well. Some are better than others, though. Some try to find books that are drawn better. Though. Nothing drives me crazier than drawing books where the drawings are awful. Right? Have you seen? You know what I'm talking about? Right? They're like a lot of drawing, but like everyone and his brother has done a drawing book, and you know they can't draw. I say, really? It's like, what's that all about? It's like, you have to be able to play pretty well before you get up on the bandstand with, you know, Max Roach, right? Don't put out a book on drawing if you can't draw. Impressive. I'm being cranky. There are too many videos and books out there. That's all. Forgive me for being cranky. My wife was here, she'd say, being cranky, man. Cranky. Just cranky. Just cranky. I already know.
You're not there yet.
I'm not that cranky.
You're not there.
I haven't hit like my, you know, I already knows when the, you know, things get dark.
I know.
I'm not dark yet.
You're not cranky, right?
I know John's going. So when I'm confident that, you know, it's looking pretty good in terms of the proportions, the placement of things, the overall shape. And you see, it's pretty clear, you know, he's got a particular shape, right, that you can go for right away. And if you express just what we started with over here, it actually starts to look like him pretty quickly. And that's with most people, you know. That, you know, if you can get that outside shape, looking, you know, that silhouette, and the concept of the silhouette, they will get there, you know, quickly. Warmish, relatively dark, and I see some areas that kind of move more greenish, more reddish, you know, even touches of violet that I see in it, which the red, yellow, blue will give you all of that. So you can really work with the cadmium string and blue, or let's say even the viridian or black, and get all these kinds of variations. The same idea, the same principle works in the lights. So if I'm taking red and I'm taking the yellow, one of the yellows, see, no ochre, right? And I'm playing with the white moving into that. I can move towards more of a scarlet, more of a red pink, more of yellows, but then I have to control it, right? This gets too hot, some of this stuff. So that's no good. So how do you control it? Complements, right? So if I'm moving towards an orange, if I go into the blues, and I ran out of cobalt, I'm going to have to get some. Now I can't really see, but unfortunately this light. Is that still okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
So with a cool and with a red and with a yellow, you can get, and when I say a cool, I'm specifically not saying blue, because you could be using greens, you know. Some portrait painters like to use cerulean blue. Some like to use chromium oxide green. But see, that's that controlled with the cools coming in. That's just ultramarine with some white. And so you go from there to there. Now, his skin tones have elements of that, but there's a shift, right, from Caucasian skin tones, and there's a whole range of that, right? There's very pink people, right? When I say pink, you're talking like, let's say, more Scandinavian, which are kind of the cooler pinks with grays. Then you have the more ochre and orangey type skin tones, which is probably more predominant. And then you keep shifting all the way to sub-Saharan Africa, which is, try to paint that, man, good luck. That's really tough because it's so dark and yet rich, and you know, there's a lot going on there. So In terms of what's a good, proper skin tone and what's not a skin tone, there's no such thing, you know. It depends on the person and it depends on the lighting that they're in. When he steps off the stand without that yellow light and he goes under something else, he's gonna look completely different, as you all know. It's just anyone who paints here. So when I'm not sure about what the color is, I'll just try to read it as if it's warmish and what the value is, or if it's coolish and what the value is. So what I've found is that I may not know exactly what the color is, but if I can identify its relative warmth or relative coolness and go after that, it gives me at least a point of departure that then I can play off of. So I kind of like to sneak up on the color, you know, personally. I don't think that I can ever get it right the first time. I like to put down some notes, see where it starts to go, see what the values look like, and play off of that. And if you have any questions, please ask. You know.
Sorry.
Knew it had to be you.
It had to be me.
At least it wasn't like some personalized ringtone.
That's only for your cause.
Yeah. Now, the unfortunate part of painting is, of course, as you start developing flesh tones, you start to lose your drawing. And you have to make sure you get it back again. But that's the nature of Alacrima painting. But it would be the nature of even if you did a very accurate drawing right now, you'd still have that same problem. Because you'd be going on top of the accurate drawing. So there's no, way of getting around the fact that if you want to paint the form in a sculptural manner, you're going to have to be willing to lose the drawing before you get it back again. take a break. Because I'll show, I'm gonna shoot something. That's fine, thank you. dark, you lose color, and you lose a sense of you know, the illumination of the space around you. It gets too deadly. Now, I'm not saying that you wouldn't get some darker notes in these shadows, you would, but as an average, you're looking at around that. So let me take that gray note. You see where I am relative to this number 7. And shadow somewhere between 7 and 8 on this Denver Ross thing. So let me see where that is. Yeah, you know, now some of it picked up. So that's a little bit lighter than what I have there, which is what it should be. It should. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? It's so, you know, this is the tuned piano. This is the tuned piano. It's very important that you stay, you know, within your extremes, you know, distantly enough so that you can move to this kind of stuff here. And by the way, this starts to give a tremendous amount of graphic power to the piece. Like at a certain point, when you start laying in these notes, it, you know, everything starts to pop. The darks are what make, you know, it gives the sense of articulation. Everyone's always concerned about the highlights. I find that the accents are actually more important than the highlights. Because the accents articulate the drawing. You know, they kind of, you'll see it in all of the masters anyway. You know, you'll see that these darks are beautifully placed and they're powerful. And they laid the darks in at the end and on top. So if you go up close to a Rembrandt, but be careful, you know, at the Met, I'm going to get cranky again. If you go relatively close to a painting, it's like, you know, it's like hazmat teams come down, you know, in suits, and, you know, they fly in on, you know, they get very, very, very nervous, man, you know, it's like, these don't stay, you know, especially the Russians there. The Russian guards are very scary, even the women, they're just very tough. But I understand, they have so many people there, they have to be careful. But it's nice to be able to go up to a painting very close and look at some of these things. And when you go up close to a Rembrandt, let's say, or any of those masters, you'll see that the darks are laid in on top at the end, and are laid in, you know, very, you know, solidly, like almost opaquely. You know, so they have transparent shadows and whatnot, but the darks are laid in, and they don't mess with them, they leave them alone. Now, at this point, and look, as you know, I'm going faster getting to a certain point in this painting than I normally would because it is what it is. It's a demo. But this is a part where you start to now take the pieces and develop. And so at this point, you can emerge out of one zone, out of the effect, out of an eye. You know, whatever you want to do with this, you know, there's no right way. Some of the professional, you know, the people who really are just straight portrait painters and have a system set up and whatnot, they work very, very methodically, you know, which is great. It's certainly the work. And so they will build in a way that's, you know, kind of, replicable. Do it the same way each time as the way they step across the form, halftones and whatnot. I don't work that way. I can, I don't like it. I'd rather just move in and out of space and kind of see where it leads me. However, if I'm doing a commissioned portrait, I do take a little bit more care, there's no question. Is no fair, man, because I should be paying you for I had 4 to 5 hours. That's the sweet spot. See, so maybe when everyone leaves, you just hang out. I guess not. I see that the laugh tells me no. 'Cause it's a nice thought, John. I think, I've been finding that lately, that there's 3 hours is quite enough, not quite enough. What do you think, Walter?
To finish a painting? Wow.
Do you like 3 hours?
I guess it depends. Sometimes it goes really fast and sometimes not.
I like a little bit more time, because it gives something, gives me a sense of playing with, because usually what happens is at this stage, I'll start to screw things up, because I'm trying to finish
Yeah.
certain areas,
Yeah.
and so this is like a critical area, so
Yeah.
I find that I start to screw things up, and then I need a little bit more time to pull it all back together.
Yeah.
But then, of course, it's like, rest please, thank you very much, and everyone claps to the model, and I go home, but, hey, listen, it's what you get with unions. Union models like Dr. Graves here.
We asked me to scale it,
See, now it's a matter of like really going after these tones. Now, see, why did I choose green here? I chose green or gray green because this plane is receding. So I want to pull that, I want to create that feeling that it goes towards the background there. Okay, so it's a receding plane, so receding planes generally, as a rule of thumb, not always, but generally, they're cool. Advancing planes tend to feel warmer.
Can you give an example of an advancing versus a receding plane?
Well, the forehead here, see how it tends towards a yellowish kind of feel, right?
In that area.
As opposed, now as you step away from there, it goes a little bit more pink, orange pink. The other thing about having the model, having a longer session, if you want to try to do something in one sitting, is that it gives the paint just enough time to set up so that then you can go on top and hit the color again a little more powerfully. So what happens is in an alacroma painting like this, that's short, you're not, now you can get these stronger tones, but you have to really put down enough paint to achieve that. But it's nice if that first layer that you've been playing with starts to set up, and then you can go on top. But all the more reason why use more paint than less. Use more paint than less always, because it'll give you a bed to work with. If you're too stingy and you're too thin and it gets too oily, the color will never look crisp, the planes will never look clean. You see, so I can lay these on top, you need a certain amount of paint. Like I always say, think like a house painter. Think like, like house paint, like most people have painted their houses, right? Imagine if you just put a little bit of paint on the roller. Like that, it looks horrible, right? Well, this is the same thing. I know that sounds weird, but it's absolutely true. Think about taking a little bit of paint on the brush and painting, the trim on your house. It won't look right. So you want to put down enough paint so that it sits as a piece of paint. And you start to step around. Like from here, I would step a little bit darker, and it becomes facets of a gemstone, right? You don't have to agree with me. No, I wouldn't.
How long does it usually take you to do a portrait?
It depends. It depends. Sometimes I can really get a lot done in a short amount of time, but if it's a commissioned portrait, and most people nowadays, there's quite a bit of this. When I say most people nowadays, I'm not finishing my thought. There's a certain level of realism that people expect that tends to be what I would call not photographic, but not in the sense that everything is exact. It's that it has a certain kind of picky quality to it. Like, for instance, if you look at a great Velasquez, you know, at a certain point, it seems like it takes a big brush and just pulls it all together. It's very simple. And it's like music. It's a phrase of light against a phrase of shadow. It's gorgeous to look at. And you can't really do that today because everyone wants to see all these weird little halftones stuck in across the form. But the abstract power of a Velasquez is, you know, it's awesome. You know what I'm gonna say? You know, it's a different way of thinking. And it's not that people today can't paint well. They can paint very well. They can draw very well. It's the thinking that we're all, you know, we don't think the same way they did. They thought about, it was the concept, you know, they thought about painting in a different way than we do. And it shows. So it's less about the skill set and more about the thinking. That's what I believe. Except for the skill set comes into play when you're doing mural paintings. Like when you're doing like a Tiepolo or Rubens type painting, that's a whole other thing altogether, man. To paint that way is you know, it required, there's like a technology there that's been lost. You know? But when you're getting into like just doing what we're doing here and comparing it to, let's say, that beautiful, simple Velasquez head at the Met when they cleaned off, which I don't think they made it necessarily worse. They just, you know, they cleaned it. They didn't make it better though. But it's a masterpiece of simplicity. It's just.
Is this on? Yeah. Oh, you taking a movie?
Yeah, I just shot the movie all right.
For this kind of light, if you take a straight gray, you throw a little bit of orange into it, it'll warm up the gray enough for, you know, these areas here, you see? Where you want a gray but a little warmer feeling, or a little more, you know, that kind of thing, right? On the other side, it's still that kind of quality, but maybe it gets a touch cooler, you know, not a lot. But it still has a lot of warmth coming in from the light. So use the orange. Yellow goes a little too green, you know? So if you throw the yellow into the grays, the deep grays. It goes greenish, so the oranges and then see, it's a little more. And that's why, as much as possible, experiment with color, play around with your palette. Because by experimenting on the palette, even when you're not painting, just seeing what different color mixtures do, it teaches you a lot.
What black are you using?
Ivory.
Ivory?
Ivory, yep. Yep, I'm an ivory guy. But, you know, some of the other blacks are pretty interesting. More lamp black.
Do you use any phthalo on there, the green or blue?
This is phthalo blue mixture,
Yeah.
you know, because I'm too cheap to buy cerulean. It's very, you know, it's very scary to use that color. It's so much money. It's like, my God. You know, cerulean's a beautiful color though, and but this works pretty well. But it's very strong.
Yeah.
Very strong. You know, but I use definitely, as you know, I use it for the landscape.
What's cerulean blue?
No, phthalo blue, phthalo green.
It's very
Yeah.
strong.
They're just, you know, for the landscape, they're really, there's no replacement for that. And it's so, that's why Dumond, when he changed the palette, his last palette was the one that Frank Mason taught us, that's from the 30s. Because if you see some of Dumond's palettes from earlier, you know, the 20s, the teens, they're different. They have earth, you know, the landscape palette is, you know, earth tones in it, and it's just very different. And when they invented the phthalos in the 30s, Dumond, you know, being a good colorist, latched onto it because he realized how powerful they were for making greens. So the phthalo blue replaces, you know, Prussian blue. Doesn't completely replace. There's a certain beauty to cerulean that nothing is quite like it. Yeah. And then the phthalo green kind of helps to replace viridians. It's just more powerful. But you have to know how to control it, which is very, very strong. So, tread lightly. And, you know, if anything, avoid them if you have to for a portrait.
Yeah, Elizabeth said that the other day when the teacher gave her the green. And
Elizabeth Torak?
yeah, and that's what she
said.
said.
What'd she say?
And she said the next couple of months, every painting show was all green.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. My friend who had a couple of cats left out his palette in his apartment with phthalo green and alizarin on it. And he came home.
Oh, yeah?
And not only was the paint all over the apartment, but the cat, he had to basically like try to wash it there, which is impossible. And so he had to basically shave hair, cut off hair. You know. It was like, so that stuff is,
So what green are you using on the palette now?
there,
Yeah.
that's viridian, that's chromium oxide
Oh, yeah, yeah.
green, which is a very nice green for tempering flesh tones. Yeah, no rosemary brushes. I don't think I can afford them.
No, they're not that
But I
bad.
know they're popular. And they are, you know, they're beautiful. Well, the other brush that a lot of artists like is the silver brand, I guess. Silver brushes.
So,
You know, they're all good. I'm a Robert Simmons fan. For the price, because I really beat up my brushes. I like to,
you can replace them maybe.
I like to be, I like to just go, but I need a good brush. I always say, if you had to choose between as a student, better quality paint or better quality brush, the brush wins every time, because that's more important. You need a good brush. You can have cheaper paints and you won't get the color maybe as well. But if you don't have a good brush, you will not be able to control, you know, the placement of paint onto the surface. You want a brush that can hold, that has a certain amount of spring. So anyway, Robert Simmons, all these years later, I'm still a big fan of Robert Simmons.
How does your greens,
Oh, by the way, there's also sap green here, which I don't use too much. It's a nice green, but I really don't use it. It has its uses. So you'll see stuff in my palette that maybe I'm not necessarily using.
where does Hooker's green fit in that schema?
You know, Hooker's green is, I don't know much about Hooker's green. I know the, does anyone in the room know much about Hooker's
It's a
green?
mixture, isn't it?
It's a mixture green, and I know that watercolorists like to use it. Boy, you're a handsome devil, my goodness. Wow, as I'm developing, I'm saying, yeah. This guy, looking good. Wife's gonna be
Alex
jealous.
knew all along.
Like my father and mother. And you, John.
Yeah, so Hooker's green, I know it's popular on watercolor palettes, right? Like, don't a lot of watercolor artists ask for it?
Yeah,
Yeah, and I don't know much about it, you know. And I know it's a mixed, as Paul said, it's a mixed green. Most greens are mixed. And most of them, if you look at a lot of the greens that are out there, like sap green is a mixed green. A lot of the greens that are out there are based on phthalo. Phthalo is the base color for those greens. Phthalo, well, yes, sometimes phthalo blue, and sometimes phthalo green is the base for a lot of the mixers. So if you go, you know, if you find a brand that's willing to tell you the components in the mixed colors, like Gamblin, like Winsor & Newton does it, but Gamblin does, Utrecht does, any of those brands, they'll show you the paints that they use, not the proportion, you know, but they'll show you what they used. And it's amazing. You say, wow, you know, is that all it takes? You know? So what I do, again, just for fun and to learn a bit more, is try to replicate the mixtures myself. So I've learned a lot by just trying to make a decent yellow ochre, a decent Varriano, you know. I've learned quite a bit, you know, just experimenting like that. It's taught me a lot, you know, about the properties of the particular colors they feel. You see how these dark notes start to set stuff off, and it really makes things, you know. But you have to save them. See, if you have everything black here, you've got it. You can't go in this direction. Got it?
I think so.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.